All right, Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Great Reality Book Study. Yeah, tonight we're continuing our journey through Doctor's Opinion. Last week we talked a lot about the history of him and Silkworth, and just kind of got into the first few pages. And before we get in, I want to look at talk a little more about step one. And we did it last week, and I always like to review step one. We're on step one, and I said this before, and I'll probably say it 30 more times. There's a lot of pages on step one. There's a whole lot of pages, and 35 pages in all. That's counting Doc's opinion. And that's because we're on this investigation. And the thing of Doc's opinion is a starting point to that. And step one's the only step we do 100%. I'm not talking about abstinence. I'm talking about it. When I'm talking about it, you 100% convinced you're powerless over alcohol. That's why step one is the most important step, because it's also the only step I need to understand 100%. The other steps I don't, because I'm just doing them. But if you're not willing, to put, to be, if you're not ready for step one, you know, nothing more can happen. We can't, we don't want any lurking notions that one day we can have a drink. You want to be convinced. And that's exactly why step one is the foundation. And if you look at, you picture a foundation of a let's say like a 30-story apartment complex, right? How vital is that foundation to that building, right? Because it's the most essential part of that building. Because any structure, that structure must rest on that solid foundation, because it's the base of which that entire large building is gonna stand on. Because it's gonna hold up all those heavy walls. And that's not just the walls, but it's the roof, the weight. It anchors it all together. The most important thing about that foundation, when they're building it, it needs to last forever. Because the only way to redo a foundation would be to take out the whole building, right? So that foundation needs to last forever. So it's extremely imperative to pay attention to every detail, that goes into that foundation, you know, and it will always, so it remains intact. And that's why any builder takes the foundation very seriously. A lot of building companies today bring in a separate company that builds the foundation. So in our book, we're building a spiritual structure, and that begins with this foundation. And it's called the Willingness Foundation, or the Readiness Foundation, you want to call it that. Are you ready to admit you're powerless? Right? I said this before. If you're not ready to admit you're powerless, nothing else can happen. So you're either ready or you're not. And some it takes years to become ready, right? It takes years to become ready. So that's how important this foundation is. Just like that large building, we're building something that has to be very important to the rest of our recovery. And we're gonna build that foundation as this book study continues over the months and months and months we do this. So last time, we talked about these inebriate asylums, and alcoholics, sole purpose was to keep alcoholics and addicts off the streets because they're criminals and rapists. And that's just the way the media, the press, we'll call it back then, put it out there. And to do that, they made sure that addicts and alcoholics were diagnosed as mentally insane. And it's that furthered the stigma that alcoholism and addiction was solely a problem of the mind. They would not even consider, they didn't want to hear there might be a physical reaction. And if they did, most doctors couldn't put two and two together to figure out why what they're talking about. That was until Silkworth came along. And he worked with 40,000 alcoholics slowly and with us for 38 years before we even existed. 38 years. That's crazy, considering Bill Wilson was, I think was 40 when 44 when he got sober, I think. I remember. I forget. But it's a crazy aspect to look at like that. But his allergy obsession concept changed everything, changed the world. What he discovered was the missing link why people are real alcoholics. And it's very important to realize who this book is written for. And we're not trying to exclude anybody out, but it's written for the real alcoholic, the ones who cannot grasp regular human concepts as here's how you stop drinking. But this radical concept that the body was sick and not just the mind helped, legions and legions of alcoholics and addicts get out of those mental hospitals. And think about this for a second. It hasn't even been 100 years that we're just scratching the surface. And it's like, even I heard a guy say this about the spirituality thing. It's just the last 100 years that we've really started figuring out the spirituality thing. This last 100 years, we started figuring out addiction. It's not even 100 years yet, because it won't be a 100-year anniversary of of AA, and we got 10 more years for that. So it's been 94 years that anyone even knew what alcoholic was. No one knew what it was. So thousands of years it was like that. They were branded criminals and insane. So they were treated as such. So that's why I always say we're blessed that that these people came along, that Silkwood crossed paths with Bill Wilson. So tonight we're going to talk about our diagnosis. So if you go to a doctor, the diagnosis is to determine and identify the nature of your problem, your illness, your disease, whatever. That's your diagnosis. You have cancer, you have a heart condition, you have a MS, whatever it is, right? So when a doctor gives you a diagnosis, it's to explain to you precisely why you are sick, right? And that's what Silkworth's going to do. So we're on XXVI. And we're going to look at the old diagnosis first. And that's, where it says it did not satisfy us. We're going to look at the old diagnosis before we get to the Silkworth's diagnosis. It says it did not satisfy us. We read this last week. I'll read it again. It did not satisfy us to be told that we cannot control our drinking just because we're maladjusted to life, that we're full fight for reality, outright mental defective. That's the old diagnosis of alcohol addicts and addicts. They're crazy, maladjusted to life, full fight for reality. And even the addicts weren't satisfied. They knew it was something more. They just want to put us in another room, throw away the key, and bye. So we're going to go to XXVIII, XXV and they're going to give us the groundbreaking diagnosis that changed everything. This is a powerful paragraph. It's a very powerful paragraph. And there's several paragraphs in this book that just jump out at you. I mean, if you want to read just one paragraph on step one, if you had to, this would be the one. I mean, I'm not saying you just read, there's several paragraphs. I mean, there's 4 or 5 that really stand out, but this is the one. And but this is one of the paragraphs in this book that just jumps out. So it says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics. So chronic is something that's not talking about pot. Chronic is reoccurring, persistent, ongoing, and not always fatal, right? I had a guy say that, chronic can also mean stretched out over a period of time. That's why it's not always fatal. So the chronic alcoholic is a manifestation of an allergy. So manifestation is a sign that something exists, is present, right? My dad recently had skin cancer, right? He had it removed, but the manifestation of that was, horrible mark he had on his ear, right? So it's a manifestation, the sign of an allergy. So when I read this the first time, I was like, I don't break out in hives when I drink. That's my mind saying to me. And I told it to the sponsor I had. And my sponsor had me, because I heard of this allergy thing before. It was 96 when I went to my first book study ever, and I heard these two guys speak, and this one little short guy broke down doctor's opinion. And I heard allergy, and then I got a sponsor that night. He broke down the first set to me, so I heard of it before. I haven't explained allergy obsession under the influence before, believe it or not. But so when I got to AA in 2000, I fully I don't know fully, but I understood I had an allergy obsession. But he had me, but it was always in my mind, why do they call it an allergy? I thought it was kind of silly. You break out, I don't break out in hives. And my sponsor told me that he handed me an old beat up dictionary, like a 1930s one, and he had me look up in that 1930s dictionary, and it said abnormal reaction to a substance. Abnormal meaning away from normal. Do you have an abnormal reaction to alcohol or drugs, whatever your thing is, once you start? Do you have an abnormal reaction? It's a question. That's found craving. So a craving is a powerful and controllable desire for more. And a phenomenon is a big word. It means a situation or fact that can't be explained. It's unexplainable. And he's calling this a unexplainable craving, phenomena craving. So phenomena craving is a physical allergy, the bodily, mentally different. Abnormal reaction to alcohol after the first drink. After the first drink, leading the sufferer to crave for more. Right? So I put it in my system, have a drink, and all of a sudden it goes more. I explained it to you a few weeks ago. It's the lack of proper enzymes in the liver, and that basically pickles it and stays there. And there's a lot more to it than that, but the simplest way. But it says the phenomenon craving is limited to this class, meaning the real alcoholic. It's limited to the real alcoholic and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Now, later on, we'll get into the hard drinker, the moderate drinker, and the hard drinker. Those people don't have the allergy. Or they call it temperance drinkers. When they drink, they get all they want. To drink. They also know how much they're going to drink beforehand. We don't get all we want because of the allergy. We just keep going and going and going, right? Since we have a physical reaction to alcohol that makes us a real alcoholic. It separates us from other drinkers. Here's one of the only warnings you see in this book. I mean, it might be another one somewhere, but this is one of the only warnings that really stands out to me. These are allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Now, is that going to stop a person that is a real alcoholic? Is it going to stop you from, you could have that knowledge and be dry and go, you know what? Wow. Now I know the secret. I don't have to, I'm a real alcoholic. And I can never safely use alcohol. There's my words right there. And all of a sudden, that kicks in and the mental part kicks in and boom. That's just the way it is. So that's one of the only warnings is these allergic types nurses alcohol inform at all. And look at this. And once having formed the habit, found they cannot break it. So it's no longer a habit. A habit, is a ritual or something you do over time, but found you cannot break it. People have a drinking habit and are an alcoholic. And so they found they cannot break it. Once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, and look at this part, their problems pile up on them and they become astonishingly difficult to solve. So you see the unmanageability there in the last sentence. Our problems pile up on us and we become astonishingly difficult to solve. For ourselves, we can't solve it and other people can't. Yet we'll go to meetings and pile up in meetings and sit there and hope that, someone's going to solve me somehow, solve my drink problem. And they're talking about all problems pile up on us at once. Just the consequences, the lost friends, the family, the breakups, the rehab, also the insanity of the first drink. The insanity we can't stop drinking. The loss of self-confidence. Being restless, irritable, and discontent. Living with resentment and fear. Then you have the human resources are gone beyond human aid. Astonishingly difficult to solve. Hopeless, impossible. Can't solve it. It's like our life is like a puzzle that kind of gets thrown up in the air and all of the room, and we need something to help us put it back together again. That's the steps. And I heard a guy say one time, our life is like a puzzle, but remember you go to some people's houses back in the day and they would have a outline of a puzzle that sit there for like 6 years. That was kind of like our thing. I'll get around, I'll finish that one day. But ours is like a puzzle that got thrown up in the air. But the questions I always ask, Monty, is how successful were you at managing your life, running your life, controlling it? How successful were you at that? Did you manage your life, or did it manage you, or did you control your life, or did it control you? Because you control your drinking, or did it control you? So as long as you continue to experience unmanageability, your mind will seek out ease and comfort. It comes at once by taking a few drinks. And the only way to overcome that unmanageability is 429, and living in 10, 11, 12, living in 10, 11, 12, making those old amends. Could that be that there's people in a place called Alcoholics Anonymous that, you know, sit around and at meetings and in complete unmanageability, yet they have steps up on the wall that could take them out of that? Could that happen? Hmm. You know, I think like really what we have to look at here is stands out the most. We have an abnormal reaction after the first drink that leads us to craving for more. We go on a run. Normal people don't do that. That is the bodily different part, and that's the allergy. What makes us alcoholic. But why would I go back to it if I know it's bad? What happens to my sound reasoning? What happens to my um, choices? So my son, when he was 2 years old, it's closer to 3, but he had an allergic reaction to peanuts butter. Turned blue, stopped breathing, near-death experience. Now he's 11 years old. He's still scared to death of peanut butter. He won't get near it. That's his logical conclusion because he almost died. He still, at 11 years old, has the memory of that near-death experience. Can even tell you about it, where he was sitting and everything. It's sufficient enough that he will never eat that again. He will never, eat peanut butter against his will, or call me at 3 o'clock in the morning asking for peanut butter. you know. So why do we continue to do what might kill us? We know we have this allergy. This final craving is if I'm drinking against my will, if I'm drinking, once I start, I lose control and I'm drinking every drink's against my will. That's a near-death experience as well. Craving for more. Where's the memory that's supposed to keep me in check? Everything else in our life does that, right? If you crash your car going 100 miles an hour, odds are you're probably not gonna crash your car going 100 miles an hour again. Hopefully not. Well, we might. But why isn't the memory sufficient enough? Because we have an illness of the mind, and that's the old they used to look at only, but it wasn't sufficient. But that illness of the mind is Bill called an obsession that says, despite your deep conviction to never want to drink again or use again, and knowing that it might kill you, you're going to do it anyways. You're going to swear it off one day and 15 minutes later be doing it again. So we have a physical reaction coupled with a reoccurring persistent idea of drinking or using that does not respond to reason, lacks choice. It's called obsession, mental obsession, mentally different. Joe McQueen used to say, we can't stop when we start, and when we are stopped, we can't stop from starting. As I said many times in here, I have a mind that condemns me to drink against my will and a body that condemns me to death. Follow the MLA different from our fellows. That is the missing link that Silkworth brought to Towns Hospital, the physical allergy. I think you remember when in our second study I did, we went over books that early AA members read. And one of them I mentioned that they read really close was William Duncan Silkworth's Manifestation of an Allergy, was one of his journals. You can find him on silkworth.net. And it's describing a person with the allergy who, so I'm going to read just a little bit of it to you. This is Silkworth's from his medical journal, Manifestation of an Allergy. He cannot take it or leave it alone. He finds that he has to have a drink in the morning. Then he finds after more time that his hands shake. And when he signs his name, for example, later irritability and lack of concentration survene. He is not the man temporarily he used to be. In order to meet these changes and increasing symptoms, he is compelled to increase the amount he consumes. And a prolonged spree replaces short intoxication. The phenomenon of craving is prominent, and there's complete loss of appetite, insomnia, dry skin, hypermotor activity. He has a feeling of anxiety which amounts to nameless terror. And this is the part that got me when I read this the first time. He presents a picture of a person who just finished a long race, but must have more stimulation to start once again. Think of a person when they win a marathon, they're like, they're done at the end, right? Now, they're saying that same, we look like a person who just ran a marathon, but we must find something to get us started once again. So spot on. Let's go back to XXVIII. Here we get our big book tongue twister. Frosty emotional appeal seldom suffices. I love that. Think about when your parents beg you to stop, or your your wife, your daughter, your husband. The doctor telling you, you gotta stop. People threaten to leave us. Children screaming in our face. Maybe the police, or even your own appeal to stop with or without Solomon. The obsession doesn't care about that stuff. It doesn't care about any of it. That's why interventions for real alcoholics don't work. You can have all your family there, and they're gonna tell you, hey, we're not gonna speak to you again. You got the obsession that you're like, okay. It helps maybe for people that are more on the high end, but the message is back to the book, is the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. What has depth and weight? The steps. That's the message. It must have depth and weight. And it begins with this allergy obsession. That must be explained. Nothing else. There's nothing else to tell anyone in step one. There's nothing else you can tell people in step one. But people want to add stuff to it all the time. In nearly all cases, their ideals there's a must right there, be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. So the steps are a roadmap to being grounded in a power greater than yourself. They're a roadmap to recreating your life. If any feel that the psychiatrist directing, he goes, if any feel that as a psychiatrist directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental. Let them stand with us for a while on the firing line, see the tragedy of the sparing wives of the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work, and even their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder why we accepted and encouraged this movement. That's amazing what he just said. He said, if you're wondering why I'm backing up this Alcoholics Anonymous thing, you walk in my shoes for a day. He's saying, look at the sad wives, look at the children, you be the one that comes and tell the wife that her husband's dead. He goes, he's saying we accept and encourage this movement. That's another one of his endorsements. He says, we feel after many years of experience that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. There's another endorsement again. This guy's got one endorsement after another. I mean, that's why he was so good at this. I mean, why he was a perfect person to do this. You can feel his emotions when he talked about that. All his years, nothing has worked except the steps. It says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Did we drink for any other reason? The cessation is so elusive that while they may admit it's injurious, meaning damage, harm, they cannot at their time differentiate the true from the false. To them, the alcoholic life seems the only normal one. So I'm going to give you guys an example. I want to show you the example of um, the alcoholic life being the only normal one that he's talking about. What does that look like? Go to page 151, bottom of that page. Easy number to remember, 151. So it says, now and then, a serious drinker, he's talking about a real alcoholic, being dry at the moment. So he's stone dry, maybe he's trying recovery. I don't miss it at all. Feel better, work better, having a better time. As ex-problem drinkers, we smile at such a sally. We know our friend, that person, is like a boy whistling in the dark to keep up his spirits. That scared boy, does something, whistles, whatever, to keep up his spirits so he's not scared of the dark. Look at this part. He fools himself inwardly. He would give anything to take a half a dozen drinks and get away with it. I hear people say that in meetings before. I don't miss drinking, but if I could get away with it, I would. And I'm like, what? Where's the that's the obsession. But it's just saying inwardly we do anything to take after and get if he presently tries the old game again. He isn't happy about his sobriety. He cannot picture life without alcohol. Look at this. Someday he'll be unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. Then he will know, as few do, he will be at the jumping off place. He will look for the end. He wish for the end. That's the alcoholic life being our only normal one. Go back to XXVIII. To them, life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented. So that's high anxiety, easily pissed off, and not satisfied. They're not separate things like one day I have restless, one day I'm irritable. They're talking about when you're dry. I'm easily pissed off. I'm sorry, I'm high anxiety, easily pissed off, and not satisfied, all crammed together into one ugly emotional pit. Unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort. So besides alcoholics, because the allergy obsession, we drink get a feeling of ease and comfort, and that's an in control feeling. Ease and comfort. When a non-alcoholic drinks, non-alcoholic got the allergy obsession, they have an out of control feeling, adverse feelings beginning with, they get lethargic and lightheaded, which is why they stop. More hard drinkers, the middle of the road guys that don't have the allergy still, they get those above symptoms, but they get nauseated and they continue drinking, they get sick, and they stop based on their drinking history. They remember their limit, and they can, like I said, they can always tell you how much they're going to drink. We can't because of allergy. So the restless, irritable, and discontent, unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks we see others taking with impunity, and that means without punishment. After they succumb to the desire, again, that's the obsession of the mind. That's we have succumbed to the obsession of the mind, as many do, and the phenomenal craving develops. That's craving for more. They pass to the well-known stages of a spree, because it's a binge just to run. as a result of phenomenal craving. They passed the wellness season of spree, emerging with remorse with a firm resolution not to drink again. So I'm gonna share the screen up here. I'm gonna put this in simplest terms possible, tell a little story. So hypothetically, I've actually shared meetings with like this before by telling how I drink. I usually do, but I don't do it on the screen. But so let's say I left jail, make it easy like that. Say I got out of jail and I say I left rehab, even better. I left rehab and I got a desire to drink, so I got an obsession. So what do? I drink, get loaded, craving develops. I go on a spree, off and running again. But I stop with a firm resolution not to drink again, right? Maybe in the back of a cop car. But I make the decision to only go to meetings, no steps. So I'm gonna go AA, CA, NA, SA, whatever I'm gonna go to, wherever I can find. And I might maybe I'll go to a church, maybe I go to the shrink. But I'm not doing those steps. And the problem, even with all those well-known groups, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. High anxiety, easily pissed off and dissatisfied, coupled with being, that's easily annoyed, high anxiety, easily pissed off, resentments, fear, anger, I'm not satisfied with my life. It's not going my way. Everyone's wrong. I'm a victim. And this builds up and builds up until I need ease and comfort. And I go, and this whole time I have the desire to drink. The obsession never left. So I'm sitting there at those groups I'm going to who are trying to help me with that restless, irritable, discontent mindset. And the obsession with blinding me and whipping my ass every single moment in there. And I just go right back to it. And I just keep doing that. Stop. But eventually, that's the cycle of drinking. That's the alcoholic death he talks about in the big book, is that cycle. When they mention alcoholic death, they don't mean buried in the ground. They mean the cycle of drinking. And it's actually an endless cycle, because this is what can happen. You may not have a stop. You might just keep going and going and going. One of my friends just came back after 11 years of being gone, and 6 months ago, and he's back doing well again. But he said 11 years just seemed like not that long. He goes, it's like I was spinning in a hurricane tornado. But that's where we're at with that. That's where we're at. And it says this is repeated over and over again. Now look at this. Here's our saving grace. Unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope as a recovery. What's interesting here, see, here's what's interesting. They're going to say there's very little hope as a recovery, right? But it's the same thing that all these guys say. But do they know how to produce it? Like Charles Jung couldn't do it, right? Psychic change is definitely not a word you hear at the grocery store everyday talk. First of all, psychic means mind. So they must be telling us that we need a change of our thinking. We can't produce that on our own. We can't. If we could, we wouldn't be sitting here on a Thursday night where we can be, hanging out with our family, whatever. So they're telling us we need to change our thinking. And I mean, here's the thing. To have a psychic change, I mean, I could go to all those groups I mentioned. I could go to church. I could get married. I could get a new job. I could get a raise, have a psychic change. I could even go to a meeting and have a psychic change. But that's not what he mentioned here. He didn't say, and this person has a psychic change. There's a key word in there, entire psychic change. Entire. Entire means complete or whole, right? Complete psychic change is not easily achieved, because we're talking about radical changes to our thinking and belief systems that we've had our whole life. A belief system is centered on fear, anger, guilt, and driven by things like self-esteem, high self-esteem, low self-esteem, pride, fear. But here's the thing. If I can find a way to have this radical psychic change, complete psychic change, when this radical change occurs, our thinking changes. And when our thinking changes, our beliefs totally change. When our beliefs change, our desires change. And when our desires change, our desire to drink goes away. Radical change in our thinking and beliefs shifts our desires. In other words, the obsession's gone. The only avenue that I can vouch for 110% that can do that is the steps. And you could argue and say, hey, well, what about this and that? There's some cool things out there that might give you a psychic change, even a complete psychic change. But can I recreate it? This is about I can be reborn over and over and over again. Let's read a little bit more about entire psychic change. Let's go to page 27. And this is Carl Jung describing a psychic change. Middle of 27. All right. It says they appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding force of the lives of these men are suddenly cast on one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Wow. Think of that for a second. Talking about huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. That means to get rid of and redo. We do that in 6 and 7. And what happens is ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which are once the guiding forces of our lives, are cast out, thrown to the side, and we're given a new set of conceptions and motives to live by. And not just that, they dominate us. This is telling me the steps are not about gaining anything. They're about losing something, right? It's about letting some stuff go. So how does an entire psychic change occur? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Living in 10, 11, 12. Continuous nurturing of the psychic change the rest of our lives. For the sake of it, psychic change is the same thing as spiritual conversion, which is the same thing as spiritual experience and awakening. Just other words for it. It's not a medical term, psychic change, it's a spiritual term. Very spiritual. Let's go back to XIX. It says, on the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who has so many problems, he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. It's the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules, and that's making my old amends and living in 10, 11, 12. That's a few simple rules I must continue to do. It says men and women have cried out to me in sincere, despairing appeal. Doctor, I can't go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but cannot. You must help me. Can he? No. Faced with this problem, if the doctor is honest with himself, now we're getting to the doctor, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. What he's saying is there's nothing I can do. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power. This is a doctor talking. I mean, if you ever go to a doctor and your doctor said something more than human power needs to help you here. Yeah, right. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Necessary psychic change. The aggregate, that means collection of many. The aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychic effect is considerable. We physicians must admit that we made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to ordinary psychological approach. That almost sounds like a picture him speaking at a medical convention and saying that. And he's talking about alcoholism. We physicians admit that we have made little impression on the problem, alcohol problem as a whole. Many do not respond to ordinary cycle. And he says many cry out for help. Everything they tried has little impression. Most of them do not even respond to psychological approach. This is another endorsement because he's saying they need the steps. Right? He's saying, forget all the words we can say, they get them on these steps. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. So he's going against the old way there. I've had many men who had, for example, worked for a period of months on some problem or business deal, which was settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink and they took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once began paramount to all other interests. So the important appointment was never met. Never happened to you? Or you snap out of it and go, oh my God. I mean, I have bad enough problem remembering something I was supposed to do and I forget about it. I look back when I used to drink, and you wake up on a Thursday and going, oh my God, did I go that thing on Saturday? Did I go there? Did I call my kid on his birthday? He says, these men are not trying to escape. That's what I say, non-alcoholics, whether they're hard drinkers or just normies, I say that you're trying to escape. No, here's what they are drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. Has anyone been there? There are many situations with the rise of the phenomenon of craving which cause the men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. Talking about suicide, supreme sacrifice. So think about how many people he had to find out committed suicide. I've been sober 24 years, almost. And up to about 8 years ago, I stopped counting. And so 8 years ago, I had known 11 people commit suicide while dry, while sober. But I stopped counting. And they all had one thing in common. They were unmanageable, dry, because they were not doing the steps. They didn't kill themselves because they were drinking. They're drinking in their mind. Remember it says that if he goes, you found it, he says, I forget, I was gonna say, sorry. So there are very few people in recovery, who have not thought of suicide. I mean, is there anyone, I doubt there's anyone here who's not thought of suicide when they're dry. I know I did, and only when I was bone dry. I remember an old timer told me something years ago. He told me two things saved alcoholics from suicide: alcohol or the steps. But the problem is, what calms the mind down craves more. The steps don't. The steps only crave more God. Not many alcoholics could kill themselves from drinking, not intentionally at least. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and is much detailed outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagons for keeps. They are over remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. The psychopath refers to a person suffering from an unpredictable, aggressive, violent behavior. They rarely show empathy or remorse for their actions. They have trouble interacting with people. Their social instincts like way off. They're not, they're uncomfortable living a normal life. They, they live in like a lot of self-doubt, depression, isolation. The psychopath comes from the Greek words psyche, which means mind, and patho, which means suffering. Psychopath. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand and his environment. We have a word for that. It's called denial, right? Unwilling to admit, denial. And that's the refusal to believe or accept the truth. That's all it is, you know, fooling ourselves about the reality of a situation or running away from it, escaping it. You know, there's different forms of denial. There's denial that we have a drinking problem, you know, early on when our friends and family told us, you know, there was the denial there, the denial that runs way, there's denial that runs way deeper, and that is the denial that we have an allergy. I had a guy that I sponsored, and he kept coming back and coming back and coming back. He always admitted he had an allergy obsession, and he kept drinking. And finally, he admitted, he says, "Dude, I was secretly in denial that I had the allergy. I wanted to prove myself I didn't have it. It didn't work very well, you know." And I went from rehab to rehab to rehab, and I went to meetings and meetings, and I sat down with a sponsor, and he tells me, I have an allergy obsession to alcohol. The only chance is to do the steps. I was like, I'm not that sick. I'm not as sick as you guys. You know, my first AA meeting ever, a 20-year-old punk. I'm sitting there, I look up on the wall because my course up signed, and it says, it's 11 years away from getting sober, but powerless over alcohol. I thought these people are screwed. I'm not like them. The only chance is the steps, you know. So for myself, I want to try, different ways to beat it. The right church, the right therapist, the right rehab, the right meetings. I'm gonna show these guys I'm not sick as they are. I can beat this on my own. And there's some people, the only thing you cannot beat on your own was alcohol. In a few years after being, I got chewed up and spat out, you know, I looked at another sponsor before he could even ask me about allergy obsession. I looked at him before he spoke. I said, I'm defeated for this allergy obsession at what my ass this time. I'm ready to do the steps. And he goes, explain it to me. And I explained the allergy, and he goes, you got it. You got it. And he got tears in his eyes. And there is a type of who, back to the book, there is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he could take drink without danger. I knew a guy who did like a church recovery group. It was cool. I mean, they had steps, somewhat steps there, I guess you would call it, but they never had the allergy obsession. They didn't have a disease concept. So what happens is after a few 6 or 7 years of being dry, someone goes, "Hey man, I wish you could try this wine. This is a great old vintage." And you know what? I've been away from alcohol for a while. I can do that. You know, and that's the type who thinks they can, do without the steps. So, you know, they never learn about that. So you don't learn about the allergy obsession. You eventually get to think you can do that. Next thing you know, they're out on a run and back in wherever they go to. There's a manic depressive type who is perhaps the least understood by his friends, and about whom an entire chapter could be written. Manic depressant, they call it bipolar nowadays in so many words. And bi means two, so bipolar is having two opposite directions, two opposite poles, is the way to look at it. A person with, I guess you could say like low moods followed by elevated moods, up and down. Emotions go up and down. Mania and depression. Remember, what it says and how it works. There are those too who have suffered grave emotional and mental disorders, but they too can recover if the capacity to be honest. This thing can save anyone's ass. I don't care how crazy you are. I don't care what you've gone through. I sponsored a man who has borderline severe autism. He comes across a little goofy when he talks, and he knows it. He's 39 years old, but he suffers from that, and nothing could ever get past his high manic stuff he would go through except alcohol. And he did the steps. There are those who have brave emotionalness and they have capacity to be honest. Beautiful. What is honesty? It's the awareness of where I'm at. That's all it is. Do I have a resentment? Do I have fear? Do I have this allergy? Self-honesty. People who fail are those who cannot be honest with themselves, it says in this book. Back to the book. Then there's the types of normal in every respect except alcohol's upon them. They're often intelligent, friendly people. That's the type of person that might be successful at everything they do. Look at Bill Wilson, successful stockbroker. He's pretty successful at everything else except alcohol. It shocks you. I knew a guy that was an amazing baseball player, straight A student in college, and then started drinking after he got a baseball injury. He said, Steve, he goes, nothing ever have I not been able to fix except this. That's the bottom right there. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which habituates these people and sets them apart from distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment, permanently eradicated. And, eradicated means eliminated, right? Any treatment. That's the doctor saying that. The only relief, so Silkworth's only thing he could offer them is this, because he didn't have any steps to offer them. The only relief we suggest is entire abstinence. That was what he offered them. Remember, his solution was abstinence. He had no recovery plan. He had 2% recovery rate, 90% failure rate, and 2% may not have been alcoholics. This is immediately precipitates us into seething cauldron debate. Earlier we discussed our diagnosis of the allergy obsession when you get the diagnosis from a doctor. They give you a prognosis. What's a prognosis? It's an estimation of the course it's going to take. Here's the medicine you got to take. Here's everything else that goes with it, right? Here's how long you might live. What's the likely outcome? Will you recover? So most prognoses are built on statistics nowadays. So let's look at the statistics at the time. 40,000 alcoholics, 2% recovery rate. That's his statistics. So here is his prognosis with those statistics. Much has been written pro and con, but among his physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. Let that sink in for a second. That's our prognosis, that we're doomed. It's a harsh word. It means condemned to death or ruin. How would you feel if a doctor told you you're doomed for anything? Back to the book. What is the solution? It's a great question. Perhaps the best I can is relating one of my experiences. The man he's describing here is Hank Parkhurst. And he's the guy that helped get the big book published, Bill Wilson's right-hand man. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage. Seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living with, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange situation. I knew the man by name and partially recognized his features, but all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with life, reliance, and contentment. I talked to him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. One of my closest friends in recovery was this guy named Dr. Mark. And Dr. Mark was an amazing boy. He was an addiction medical specialist, but he was also a emergency room doctor. And he did surgery too. And he did an amazing presentation of doctor's opinion. His nickname was, when he was drinking, he used to show up at his friend's house with all the pills you can imagine because he was a doctor. They call him Dr. Meltdown. Um, and he told a story about a guy who they would bring him in and his clothes would be so saturated, stuck to his body from filth. They would have to cut off his clothes and jumpstart him to get him to drink again. And the guy would say, "No, I'm not ready to do this," and blah, blah, blah. And one day he's in the emergency room and he's looking over a patient. The guy taps him on the shoulder and he turns around and he goes, "Hey, doc, how's it going?" He's like, "I don't know who you are." It was that homeless guy who had over a year sober, spiritually awoke. And he goes, "I did not recognize him at all." And he had known that guy for 10 years. And I've known people too. The rehab I sponsor at for many years, I see those guys in the obituary columns and panhandling and stuff, but there's amazing when you see a guy and you saw how low how good he was in the rehab, and then he goes back out and you see him all shrunk up, and you see him again with some recovery, and you don't recognize him. He says, "When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis, deciding his situation as hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was rescued by a search party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had talked with me in which he frankly stated that he thought treatment was a waste of effort unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink." Wow. His alcoholic problem was so complex, his desperation was so great that he felt his own hope would be thrown, what we call moral psychology, and we doubted if ever even that would affect any effort. However, he did become sold on this ideas contained in this book, and he had not had a drink for many years. I see him now, and then he made a fine specimen of manhood and one could meet. He says, "I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book." Oops, sorry. While he may read this book, and though he may come to scoff, he may remain to pray. I mean, that's a powerful reading right there, you know, and, you know, it's just very powerful, the whole doctor's opinion, you know, and the, the main thing is to look like this is, what do we learn out of doctor's opinion? Well, we learn we're powerless, right? I do what might, kill me against my will, and it can condemn me to death once I start. I can't stop. It takes away reason, it takes away choice. convinces me I'm beyond human aid. And so we learn about human aid and beyond human aid. I'm living in hell one day to the next because my human power has failed me. Can it help me? Being convinced we're hopeless, right? And so we learn about hopelessness. I feel utterly without hope. I can beat this. The door is locked and the key is thrown away, and I don't know what to do. The only thing to do is admit defeat. And we learned about defeat. I'm broken. I cannot put myself back together again. That paves the way to reconstruction. I mean, even though I'm defeated, I can now convince I need power. And only a real alcoholic knows what it's like to be defeated by this disease. And only a real alcoholic knows what it's like to reach within and find the strength to seek power. I mean, how many times have we thought, you know, if only I could have stopped, if only I could have control, if only I was normal. Right now, let go of if only, that's the thing. And look into the deep darkness of your abyss and your innermost self and admit the truth. Remember, they said before, the end justifies the means. Next week, we're going to look at Bill's story, and we're going to look at what's called the doom curve. So I have a list of 30 doom curves in the first part of Bill's story. It should be a lot of fun.